So in order to build both strength and hypertrophy, you need to be able to solve a big problem that we have, which is that our performance on a daily and weekly basis is not linear like this. It looks more like ups and downs. Some days and weeks you're stronger, and then for some reason you're weaker and more tired. Like, this is the normal scenario. Now, what's the problem when some workouts feel harder than normal, some feel easier? The problem is that you're messing up on the number one variable in training, which is how hard your workouts are. Like, this is the challenge that you're giving to your muscles, which makes them then decide if it's worth it to get stronger and to get bigger. You can't allow for this fluctuation to mess up how hard your training is. You need your training to be flexible and adjust so that this variable is always perfect. Now, for the last 5 years, I have used both systems for strength and for hypertrophy to neutralize all of this so that how hard training is the number one priority that I always get right. So in this video, I want to share with you the systems that I've used both for strength and for hypertrophy so that this is not going to be a problem for you anymore. And I'm gonna give you real examples so you can just upgrade your training, take them, use them, and we're all happy. Because as you know, this whole channel is meant to be the channel on building strength and muscle at the same time. As a normal person, I was able to build 20 kilos of muscle while at the same time learning skills like the human flag or doing an 80 kilo weighted chin-up or a 240 pound weighted dip. So let's start from the first system for hypertrophy called double progression. Double progression. So I'm gonna just show you with an example, which I think is gonna be clearer. So this is the scenario, okay? You have your exercise, let's say like bicep curls. Then you have a certain number of reps that you wanna do. Let's take a rep range like 10 to 15 reps. Then you're gonna have a certain number of sets, like 3 sets. And then you wanna know how close to go to failure. And let's say in this example, you want to go to failure. What's the only thing missing here is the weight. So let's say in this example that we're gonna use 10 kilograms or like 22 pounds. So this is the scenario. How do you handle the fluctuations in performance so that the number one priority, which in this case is how hard training is, or to failure, that's your priority in this case. That's the challenge that then allows your biceps, tells your biceps to get bigger. How do you handle the fluctuations? So this is what we do. This is how double progression works. You start with your weight. So set number 1, we have 3 sets in this example. Set number 1, you have 10 kilos. And what you do is you just think about going to failure. You rep out your 10 kilos until you reach failure. And then you think about how many reps you did. So let's say with those 10 kilos, until you go to failure, you keep going and you do like 12 reps. What do you do now? This is within your rep range of 10 to 15, so you change nothing. Okay? Next set, 10 kilos again, you're a bit more tired. Let's say that you do 9 reps. You keep going to failure and you hit failure at 9 reps. You're unable to do 10. Now you are below the lower limit of the range. And so for the next set, you lower the weight a little bit, for example, from 10 to 8 kilos. And again, you go to failure, which is our priority, remember? And so maybe you do 10 reps. And by the way, if you're interested in building your strength and your physique, especially at the same time for free, you can get a lot of resources that I created personally in Project Delta, which is the link in the description. And that's not shallow stuff, by the way. Like, I put a lot of thought into those resources. Really, you see the videos, but there's a whole other world I'm creating in Project Delta that you don't see. So really, if you're interested, that can be very powerful, and you can get it in the link in the description. Now, let's continue the example. Let's say next week you have again the same exercise. You repeat the same weight, okay? If you went lower than the limit, the next workout, nothing changes. The same workout, you went lower, you lower the weight, and we're good, so that you remain within the range. Next workout, you repeat the weight again. So again, 10 kilos. Let's say today you're stronger, and on the first set, you actually do like 17 reps. You are above the upper limit. Now what do? You change nothing for this workout. So you repeat again 10 kilos for the bicep curls. You keep going to failure, and let's say that you do like 15 reps, and then for the final set, again 10 kilos, and you do 12 reps. Now you went over the upper limit with this set. What do you do then? Next workout, you increase the weight. So you do 12 kilos, for example, and again you go to failure, you see how many reps you do, you look at the upper and lower ranges, and you adjust. Basically, if you go, this is the summary, if you want, for double progression, which you use for hypertrophy, okay? This is a system for hypertrophy. If you go over the upper range, for this workout, you change nothing. Next workout, you increase the weight. If you go below the lower range, like here, next workout, you change nothing, but this workout, you decrease the weight. This allows you to, at once, to always get how hard the set you want it to be. That's always perfect. So you wanted every set to be to failure. That's the real challenge that you're giving to your muscles. And every set is to failure. And what flexes, what allows you to adjust, is how many reps you do. Okay, we have a range and we have an upper and lower limit. And then the weight. That's why it's called double progression. You're able to progress both reps and weight in function so that you go to failure or whatever hardness of workout that you want, okay? Now, to actually implement this, let's see a couple realistic questions. So the first question you may have is, okay, how do I choose, for example, the rep range? We said for bicep curls, we said like 10 to 15 reps, but how do I choose that? So I have prepared a little table here with my favorite rep ranges for double progression, okay? Now, some guidelines is, for example, for the heaviest exercises, like free weight compound exercises, okay? For the heaviest exercises like bench, barbells, squats, deadlifts, I like to work in the 4 to 10 rep range, okay? So you can pick one of those 4 ranges. For like machine compound exercises like a leg press or a lat pull down, I like to work in the 6 to 12 rep range. And finally, for smaller muscles and isolation movements, I like to work in the 8 to 15 rep range, okay? So from 8 to 15, one of those 2. And basically what you do is you just have your exercise, for example, again, bicep curls, you pick a rep range, doesn't have to be perfect the first time, and you see how you handle it, okay? You see if your technique doesn't break down. So for example, let's say that you're doing bench press, okay? Bench. Let's say that you want to start from 8 to 12 reps as your range. But then you notice that when you go above 8 to 10 reps, for bench specifically, your technique starts to break down, you have some problems. And so you decide next month, for example, or even next workout, to go from 8 to 12 to maybe 7 to 10. And you experiment with that. If you don't like it, you can go to 6 to 9, okay? This whole range from 4 to 30 reps has been shown over and over to be pretty much to deliver the same results for hypertrophy as long as you go to failure or very close to failure, okay? So you have flexibility in the rep range. You can just choose one based on your preference and experimenting.
Okay, so you can also see here double progression with a template that you can get in the link in the description. So you just select the exercise. This is more of a template to illustrate how this works, okay? Let's say that the exercise you choose is dumbbell bench, okay? Number of sets from 1 to 6, let's say 4. A rep range, let's say 8 to 12. Starting weight, maybe 70. The weight jump, so if you go over the upper limit of or below the lower limit, how big of a weight jump do you want when you increase or decrease weight? Let's say 5 kilos or pounds, by the way, it makes no difference as long as you just write the number, and the closeness to failure. So in practice, when you work out, you can see here, you have 4 sets, okay? You have your weight and you know how close you go to failure. What you do is you just take the weight and do as many reps as you can pretty much. You do just your normal set until you get to failure or whatever closeness to failure you have. So for example, let's say that we do maybe 14 reps on the first set, okay? So you can see here on the second set, weight stays the same, but next week here, weight goes up. Now what happens? Let's say that on the second set you do 10 reps. On the third set, maybe you do 6 reps. So you're below the lower limit of 8 to 12, okay? So on the next set, you lower the weight, okay? Automatically here it's 70, becomes 65 because the weight jump was 5, okay? So you can experiment with this in the link in the description if you want. And this is how simple double progression can be.
Now let's talk about strength. We have actually 2 options for strength. One that is less precise and one that is more precise. Now, why would you ever choose the less precise version? Because first, it's faster. So faster to warm up, faster to set up. It's pretty much almost always good enough. And then we're gonna see why. And yes, those 2 are actually the reasons, okay? It's pretty much almost always good enough for the majority of your workouts, and it's faster to set up. Now, the more precise option is very close to perfect, but it's also a bit slower, and it makes sense only when you're like pushing yourself closer to your limit. When you're doing PRs or competitions, or basically when it's important that you don't mess up, okay? And it can also be a bit more fun because every day it's a bit more of a mystery what weight you're gonna use. We're gonna see why in a second. So I'm gonna go over both systems so that you can choose whatever you want. I have used both. Some make sense in some scenarios, as I told you, some in other scenarios. So let's start from the less precise system, which is called failure cap. So this is a strength system to allow you to handle the fluctuations in performance that you have daily, as you know, okay? Since to some of you this can be very useful, I wanted to make a quick advertisement, well, from myself, because I always wanted to create one place, just one place where one would find everything you would ever need to know about training, about how to get stronger, how to build muscle, like all the most powerful ideas and models all in one place. And so I set out to do it, and took me 2 years of work, but I made it, and you can get it in Project Delta. Project Delta is the link in the description, and it's free. And once inside, you can get this in the premium tier. So again, this is meant to be the last thing you will ever need. So if you're interested, you can check it out in the link in the description of this video. Strength work in general needs you to be fresh and rested. So what we don't want is to be too tired. Too tired, more tired than we have planned. And that's why we can use a failure cap, which just means that, for example, we decide to not get closer than to failure than 3 reps in reserve. And what we do is that we stick to this hard failure cap. So in a real example, we may have, let's say a 3 sets of 4 reps of pull-ups, weighted pull-ups, okay? And we want to make sure we don't go over this. So what you do is you have a predetermined weight, maybe, let's say 40 kilos or 100 pounds, okay? And you just go and do your 3x4. If at some point, for example, at rep number 3, you feel like you're already here, you stop the set there, okay? So set number 1, let's say first set, 40 kilos, you do 4 reps, and you haven't hit this. Nice. Second set, you do 4 reps, and you're kind of at the limit, okay? Next set, at rep number 3, you already hit this, and so what you do is you stop at 3 reps, okay? We don't want to go over this limit because strength doesn't really benefit from going super close to failure. Actually, I have a chart for you here that shows the difference, the benefits in going to failure for strength versus hypertrophy. So we have strength here and hypertrophy here. For hypertrophy, the closer you go to failure, okay, here is failure, you can see that the closer you go to failure, the more growth, which is this, the more growth you get. So there is benefit to go all the way to failure and even beyond failure. But for strength, the curve is flat. So there's not really any difference between going all the way to failure or close to failure. The difference really is in how tired you get. So while in the single workout and set there's not a lot of difference, overall, if you stay a bit farther away from failure, you're gonna be less tired and be able to do more quality work, which is what we want. That's why we use a strength cap, for example, right here, like 2-3 reps in reserve. And then it depends, I'm gonna make a video on that, on what your objective is for each strength set. Okay? So this is why we want to use a strength cap, because we have some flexibility. Even if the first set you're a bit farther from failure, we have seen that it doesn't matter that much. That's why we have this flexibility. So if some days you feel stronger or you feel weaker, this failure cap allows you to not go into a territory where you're messing up your workouts. Now, I have a rule to adjust this weight, where basically if you, for 2 workouts in a row, basically you are above this failure cap, okay, by 2 to 3 reps, next time I increase the weight, okay? So if for all 3 sets, for example, instead of 3 reps in reserve, we're more like 5, all 3 sets, then next time instead of 40 kilos, I may go up to 45. And I also use the opposite rule of this. So for 2 workouts, if pretty much all sets, because it's okay if some of the sets hit it and some don't, but if all sets hit the failure cap, so if I'm barely able to complete the reps or I don't complete them at all, next workout, so the failure cap, next workout I decrease the weight. So from 40 kilos to, for example, 35 kilos in this example, okay? So with this rule, I can adjust my weight both in the single workout and overall for my trend. In general, if you're getting stronger, this is what's gonna happen in most cases, okay? So failure cap was the less precise option, which is good in most cases. But what if you have, you want to attempt a PR or you are at a competition? You can use the more precise option, which is anchor sets. And this is how it works in a real example, okay? So what you have is, like in practice, when you go to the gym, you're gonna have warm-ups that warm you up for higher and higher weights. So if you're warming up for squats, for example, you may have just the bar here, 1 plate, 2 plates, and so on, okay? Basically, you're warming up with anchor sets to a predetermined weight. Let's say for our example of squats, that's 140 kilos or 3 plates, okay? This is a weight where you should be at like 3 to 5 reps in reserve. So it's 1 rep, okay? Just one by one, wait a second. 1 rep, okay? 140 kilos, and this is how hard it should be. Based on how this rep goes, you can assess how strong you are on that day, and this informs your first actual working set, okay? Your first actual set that's meant to be intense, okay? The actual working set and not the warm-up. And this is how anchor sets work, okay? So you have a low risk, if you want, a low risk last warm-up that informs your first actual working set, which may be like 1 rep with 160. But if this is easier, this is why anchor sets are more precise. If this is easier than normal, maybe your working set, instead of being with 160, is gonna be with 170, okay? Now you can use percentages to work with this. You can even use multiple anchor sets. So a thing that I did many times is that if this was hard, like to the expected level, I would go straight into the working set. But if this was too easy, I would add an optional anchor set, for example, 1 rep with 150 kilos, to be even more precise, to be even closer to failure, but to the point where I wouldn't get too tired, okay? And so I would use this to then assess what weight to use on the working set. Now you can see how this is more precise because each set informs precisely how strong you are and informs the next, compared to failure cap here, where your weight is predetermined, okay? Which is fine because for strength, we don't have to be super precise about how close we go to failure, counterintuitively. But in some scenarios, you may want to do this. Now, a question could be, do you have to just use 1 rep for your anchor set? And in general, I recommend it because first, you use anchor sets for the heaviest scenarios like attempting PRs or competitions. But second, 1 rep is gonna make you less tired because remember, this is still a warm-up compared to doing like 4 reps, for example, even if you're at the same distance from failure, okay? Less reps at the same intensity are gonna be less tiring, which for a warm-up is what you want, okay? If you do too much work in the warm-up, then you're gonna get to the working set that you're a bit too tired. So this suits best warm-ups with just 1 rep, okay? Well, this, on the other hand, this is also why it's faster. Failure cap can work great with warm-ups where you just warm yourself up to this weight, which, since it could be multiple reps, is not as high as this weight, okay? Now, another question is, how close? 2 questions, actually. Let's answer them at once. First is, how close to failure for strength? Well, it's obviously for strength. And also, how many reps? Because mainly in this episode, we talked about the weight and how to manage that so that your normal fluctuations are neutralized. So for going how close to go to failure, now you've seen this in this chart, how really doesn't matter that much, but what I like to do is to do in each session 2 harder sets and 2 easier sets, okay? So 2 harder sets, like 2 to 3 reps in reserve. They're more for actually testing and training your strength, practicing with higher weights, and I do those with 1 to 3 reps. And then I do 2 easier practice sets, farther from failure, like even 8 reps in reserve. Though at that point I don't even think about reps in reserve, I think more about a weight that doesn't feel too hard, doesn't make my muscles burn, is more about practicing the weight, mostly about just getting more efficient with the movement, which is what a lot of strength is about. And I do this, since it's to get more practice, I do more reps, and I like to do 4 to 6 reps. So this kind of answers both questions. So how close to go to failure, I like to do 2 harder and 2 easier sets. And for reps, really the range for strength is 1 to 6 reps. If you go above 6, you can still get stronger, but the transfer to the 1 rep max, the pure expression of strength, is gonna be less, okay? So this range is more ideal, and I distributed it in this way. 2 harder and heavier sets, 2 easier and lighter sets, which are mostly for practice.
In the template, you also get a sheet to experiment with anchor sets, okay? So the setup is simple. You just pick an exercise. For example, we could do bench press, okay? This works best with exercises with external weights. So if it's something like pull-ups, where there's your body weight involved, the percentages are a bit different. It can absolutely be done, but in this template, it's more about exercises like bench, squat, okay? So the setup is just like this, okay? You pick the exercise, you pick your last warm-up weight, let's say 100 kilos or pounds, again, makes no difference. You just write the number. Then you can pick a number of reps. Usually for the last warm-up, you have 1 rep, okay? At 2 reps in reserve. That's how I like to do it. And you already have the weight. So this is your setup, okay? You have your last warm-up, a single with a predetermined weight. Then you have your first working set and then other working sets after that. So what you do is, you do your 1 rep with 100 kilos, let's say in this case, and you write how close you are to failure, actually, okay? So let's say that even though you had planned for 2 reps in reserve, what you feel is 3, okay? This calculates your estimated 1 rep max, basically how strong you are that day. This is why it's pretty fun. You can see your performance day to day, and it tells you the weight to choose for the next set, okay? Now, this template calculates it for you, but it's just simple percentages, okay? But instead of just having the weight for the important set being predetermined, basically it tells you the weight once you do the last warm-up. So if, let's say, the last warm-up with 100 kilos was a bit harder for us, maybe it was like 1 to 2 reps in reserve, you can see that the first working set's weight goes down, okay? So that's why it compensates for the fluctuations, so that the intensity planned is always perfect, okay? So no matter what, we have our 2 reps in reserve for the first working set, which is what we care about. Now, you can even do multiple anchor sets, like in this case. So let's say that after the first set, we want to have a 3x5, very far from failure, 10 reps in reserve. What we can do is, again, do our working set, 5 reps, 2 reps in reserve planned with 86 kilos. How many actual reps in reserve do we have after we do the 5 reps? Maybe we feel like we have another 3 reps in reserve, okay? This tells you for that set the estimated 1 rep max, okay? So with this, if you're able to do 5 reps with 86 kilos, again, kilos or pounds makes no difference, okay? with 3 reps in reserve, your probably max for that day is around 110 kilos for bench. That means that if you want to do 5 reps with 10 reps in reserve, you should use 71 kilos, okay? And this is how anchor sets work. Basically, the set before, through a calculated 1 rep max, tells you how much weight to use on the important sets so that the weight here is always perfect.
And so we saw the system on how to deal with the fluctuations for hypertrophy with double progression, where you prioritize how close you go to failure, the most important variable there is pretty much, and you adjust around it with varying how many reps you do with upper and lower ranges and so on, and also the weight. That's why it's called double progression. And this is cool because it also answers the question of how do I progress my weights? How do I increase them? How do I decrease them? How do I progress my reps? This also answers that. That's why I love it so much. And also, we learned 2 systems for strength. One that you're gonna use in most cases, the less precise one if you want, which is failure cap, where you just have your weight and a closeness to failure where you don't want to go over, and then you adjust. And for more precise workouts, you can use anchor sets, where you have a warm-up that tells you, based on how strong you feel on that last heaviest warm-up, how much weight to use on the first set. So as usual, at the end of every video, I'm gonna leave you with a clip of a lift of mine from my archive, all very recent, and a physique update, just for, I guess, proof that I practice what I preach. So you can enjoy that. And I'm gonna see you next week. I got a nice banger coming up, so you want to be sure to be there for that.